Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Western Canon Challenge, where we are reading the entirety of the Western literary canon out loud. Today we are moving on to journal collection number 43, and we are in the year 1852, and Emerson will turn 49 in May of that year. And as always, we begin with a short biographical entry from the editors. In January, Mr. Emerson delivered in Boston the course on the conduct of life, and one or more lectures in many New England towns. In February, he lectured in New York City and State, and in March in Maine and Massachusetts. End note. Here follows a saying from Marshall, which is given in English, or at least it says freely rendered. My own right hand my cup-bearer shall be. The best in us is our profound feeling of interest in the whole of nature. Every man feels that everything is his cousin, that he has to do with all. Blot out any part of nature and he too would lose. The great words of the world, such as analogy. What a step mankind took when Plato first spoke that word. Analogy is identity of ratio. And what civilization, what mounting from savage beginnings does it not require? The primary and secondary senses, the several planes or platforms on which the same truth is repeated. So the word of ambition, the proud word of modern science, is homology. Quote, these we must join to wake, for these are of the strain that justice dare defend, and will the age sustain. End quote. And then there's a list of names here, and I will read them off. Horatio Greenough, H. D. Thoreau, J. Eliot Cabot, J. Peter Leslie, C. K. Newcomb, John Weiss, Henry James, T. W. Higginson, Edwin P. Whipple, William Matthews, J. G. Whittier, J. R. Lowell, Theodore Parker, W. E. Channing, J. Whelpley, David W. Wasson, and then further below it has more names, George F. and T. H. Talbot, Portland, Maine, Reverend W. D. Moore, Greensburg, PA, Frank B. Sanborn, Hampton Falls, New Hampshire, George Moore, Andover. Footnote says, all these Mr. Emerson counted sure friends of freedom. Reality. The question of life is evermore between 1. Doing something well, which is an immense satisfaction to doer and beholder, and 2. Self-possession being real. Private life is the place of honor. 'Tis said a man can't be aught in politics without some cordial support in his own district, nor can a man dupe others long who has not duped himself first. I prefer a little integrity to any career. Come back from California or Japan or heaven or the pit and find me there where I was. That reality is the charm on which a good novel relies, as Villette. The animus disposes the form, as of man or woman, and of every particular man or woman. Of Henry Thoreau. He who sees the horizon may securely say what he pleases of any tree or twig between him and it. The misfortune of scholars is that people are non-conductors. The day will come when no badge, uniform, or star will be worn. I find one state of mind does not remember or conceive of another state. Thus I have written within a 12-month verses, quote-unquote, days, which I do not remember the composition or correction of, and could not write the like today, and have only for proof of their being mine various external evidences, as the manuscript in which I find them, and the circumstance that I have sent copies of them to friends, etc., etc. Well, if they had been better, if it had been a noble poem, perhaps it would have only more entirely taken up the ladder into heaven. See on this Poppy Journal, H.O. A footnote says, the sentence referred to, written the next year, is this, quote, poppy leaves are strown when a generalization is made, for I can never remember the circumstances to which I owe it, so as to repeat the experiment or put myself in the conditions." End of footnote. Which was the best age of philosophy? That in which there were yet no philosophers. Eternity is very long. Opportunity is a very little portion of it, but worth the whole of it. If God gave me my choice of the whole planet or my little farm, I should certainly take my farm. Tom Appleton said at the dinner the other day, quote, "Canvasback ducks eat the wild celery, and the common black duck, if it eats the wild celery, is just as good. Only, damn them, they won't eat it." End quote. The English are not particularly desirous that foreign nations should be ably represented at their court, and are very willing to soothe Mr. Everett or Mr. Lawrence in all the journals of the kingdom to any extent of compliment, if they can get the best end of the bargain from them when it comes to business. And if Mr. Gallatin or Mr. Adams were sent, the journals would, no doubt, be ready to mortify them with any amount of slight and snubbing, if it would disgust and drive such formidable attorneys home. Jeremiah Mason said to Richard H. Dana, quote, "Law school, a man must read law in the courthouse," end quote. And Mr. Arnold took, quote, "Horace's treatise on the vine," end quote, into his garden, but could not find the kind of buds and eyes on his vines. And it is true that all the theory in the world is vain without the thumb of practice. What could Coke or Blackstone do against the bullies of the Middlesex bar as F. and Butler? No, you must have equal spunk and face them down, ready-witted, ready-handed. New Bedford, March, 1852. Mr. Arnold thinks very humbly of the general ability of merchants. They have narrow views. Each thinks in the morning, quote, "I must make $100 today," end quote. And if he looks further, it is only to reckon how much that will make in a year. But he has no knowledge of the scope and issues of his own trade. He thinks the lawyers have much more extent of view, and if he must confide public business to a class, would confide it to them. Mr. Arnold explained the advantages and independence of New Bedford trade. The Hamburg ship is sent from New York to New Bedford to load with oil. It is cheaper to load there, and it is better done. The coopers understand it. The cooper hugs the oil cask as if he loved it, and handles it well. I like that New England, like Greece, should owe its power to the genius of its people. There is no prosperity here, no trade or art or city or great wealth of any kind, but if you trace it home, you will find it rooted in the energy of some individual, and it seems as if the welfare of the country were the deed of some 20 or 30 ingenious and forcible persons. If a young man come home from college and find his father coming in every day to dinner in his shirt sleeves from the field, he has forced himself to adopt at once some lucrative employment. But if he finds his father at ease in the parlor, he will never go to work himself. £500 a year is a sure recipe to make a fainéant in England. When a personality reaches such a strength as that of Peter the Great or Bonaparte or Kossuth, it is a fair offset to the Andes of conventionalism. European politics are too translatable into American. The Transcript, Daily Advertiser, etc. take on each question the Metternich view. In our Massachusetts courts, too, the judge is on the side of the criminal. Few know how to read. Women read to find a hero whom they can love, men for amusement, editors for something to crib, authors for something that supports their view, and hardly one reads comprehensively and wisely. The new dances, in which the dancers walk single file up and down the room, put every one on his means and are a severe test. That is, dancing is only learned to teach us to walk, as the Roman soldier carried heavier loads in peace than in war. Tin Pan. I am made happy by a new thought. While this thought glitters newly before me, I think Wall Street nothing. I accurately record the thought, and I think I have got it. After a few months, I come again to the record, and it seems a mere bit of glistening tin or tinsel, and no such world wisdom. In fact, the universe had glowed with its eternal blaze, and I had chipped off this scale, through which its light shone, thinking this the diamond, and put it in my jewel box, and now it is nothing but a dead scale. Beauty. Little things are often filled with great beauty. The cigar makes visible the respiration of the body, an universal fact, of which the ebb and flow of the sea tide is the only one example. "I hate the aristocracy," said Samuel Rogers to Judge Dewar. "I hate them." "What, you, the friend of Lord Holland and Lord Essex, and of so many nobles?" "Yes, I hate them. I never enter one of their houses, but I am made to feel that they are the great lords, and I the low plebeian." Editor's note. Here follows the remarkable story of M. Tisinet and the Indians when he saved his life adroitly by pretended magic with mirror, wig, alcohol, and burning glass, drawn from Nouveaux Voyages dans l'Amérique septentrionale by Captain Bousseau, for which see Resources, Letters, and Social Aims, pages 145 and 146. Carlyle sent the book to Emerson. Correspondence, Volume 2, pages 197 and 209. End note. April 13th. In the United States Senate, April 12th, Mr. Dawson of Georgia presented a petition from Harris County, Georgia, calling the attention of Congress to the enormous expenditures of the government, and as one step toward arresting the lavish expenditures, he was against granting any additional aid to the Collins line of steamers. Quote, "If the object be to enter into a contest with Great Britain to display finery and gewgaws," end quote. Telegraphic report. Here follows a poem called Northman. The gale that wrecked you on the sand, it helped my rowers to row. The storm is best galley hand, and drives me where I go. Gazetted terms. After all, kindred spirit, yes, to a certain extent, as a general thing, quite a number. Quote, "I do not wish this or that thing my fortune will procure. I wish the great fortune," end quote, said Henry James, and said it in the noble sense. A man is a battery whose circuit should be complete, like the ball of the earth, which is also a battery. But for the most part the circuit is interrupted, and you see only the gear or rigging of a battery. The purist who refuses to vote because the government does not content him in all points should refuse to feed a starving beggar, lest he should feed his vices. Quote, "Bend 1 cubit to straighten 8." End quote. Ellery says, quote, "What a fine day is this! Nothing about immortality here." End quote. The illustrations in modern books mark the decline of art. 'Tis the dram drinking of the eye and candy for food, as whales and horses and elephants produced on the stage show decline of drama. Then there is a quotation in French which is not given any translation. Montreal, April 19th. Saw this morning the shove in the St. Lawrence, and as I stood on the quay, acres of ice floated swiftly by downstream, and with the rest, a large piece of the road which I had traversed across the ice on Saturday. A part of the road was making formidable plunges and revolutions as it was jammed against the shore ice. Montreal, April 21st. The south shore of the St. Lawrence between Montreal and Quebec is cut up into seigneuries, a tract of land of say 3 leagues square being granted to a seigneur, who is to cut roads, build mills, etc., and he divides the land into lots among the censitaires, who pay an annual rent of 2 or 3 sous on the arpent, and whenever they sell their farm, the seigneur receives 1/12 of the purchase money under the name of loads et ventes, and whenever the seigneur sells his seigneury, the crown receives 1/5 of the price of the seigneury, and these rights are perpetual. If the land has a new tenant every year, the seigneur has a new 12th, and if the seigneury is sold every year, the crown a new 5th. The seigneuries are of all sizes and values, from £75 to £2,000 a year, and are divided and subdivided by inheritance. The seminary of St. Sulpice here owns the whole land of Montreal, or did own it until the act was passed called commutation, by which the seigneur is compelled to sell the fee of the land if 5% be paid to his seigneurial rights. The richest seigneury is that of Beauharnois. The land is settled in townships to the north of Montreal, back for 150 miles, almost exclusively by French farmers, though there are 2 or 3 English settlements as New Glasgow, and is a good wheat country. They make this year, and at this very time, April 20th, a good deal of maple sugar, the country 80 miles to the north now lying under 2 or 3 feet of snow. The arms or emblem of Canada is a maple leaf and a beaver. Mr. Baxter's answer, procured from an engineer to Thoreau's queries, is as follows: 36,800 English feet in a French arpent. In Canada, 1 French pide equals 1.06575 English feet. In France, 1 French pide equals 13.11 inches English. In Canada, 1 lu equals 3 miles English. In Lachine I saw pass Sir George Simpson, governor of the Hudson Bay Company, who I was told is the only man who has gone round the world by land, an expression which must be used, of course, with some latitude, as the first step of it is to sail from Liverpool to New York. Editor's note: Mr. Emerson's speech at the dinner of the St. George's Society, Montreal, April 23, 1852, follows. End note. Mr. President, I am flattered by the invitation to respond to the sentiment of the chair, though I am quite uncertain of being able to show this company how cordially I do it. But you are to know that we Americans feel our relation to England to be so strict, we have kept our pedigree so pure, that we praise very willingly England as a son praises his mother. I hope you will not recall M. Talleyrand's speech to the youth who vaunted his mother's beauty. Then there's a French quotation here untranslated. So I hope you will not be provoked to criticize the American element in us that differences us from the English. I have taken up so much of the time of my friends in Montreal that I must cut short what I have to say, but it strikes me that England owes her splendid career to the rare coincidence of a good race and a good place. It was a lucky fit. We say in a yacht race that if the boats are anywhere nearly matched, it is the man that wins. Put the best sailing master into either boat and he will win. England is like a ship anchored in the sea, at the side of Europe and right in the heart of the modern world. As soon as this ship got a hardy crew into it, they could not help becoming the sailors and factors of the globe. It was like a man living in a lighthouse. His boys learn to swim like fishes, and their playthings are boats, and as in sailing round the world, when there was, quote, no peace beyond the line, end quote, there were plenty of hard knocks going. They were good at that game too. So these stout fellows went up and down the world and were more abroad than they were at home, and took early lessons in the game of annexation until they have got a good part of the world in their hands. Well, the more they went abroad, the more they found to do at home, for having, as shopmen say, the very best business stand in the whole planet, they were sure of a sale of all the goods they can possibly manufacture. With this prosperity, the virtues of the race shone out. 'Tis said there are not as great individuals now as then on earth. Some countries only furnish officers, and others men. Old Persia, men, and Sparta, officers. France, England, America furnish officers and engineers to Russia and Turkey. But England has good rank and file, and there is not a country or a town in England but has yielded its contingent of worthy men, in old or in new times to the country and the race. The first name in intellect in the human race is Shakespeare. The first for capacity in exact science is Newton. And where, out of this country, has Milton his superior in epic or in lyric song? What lawgiver in learning or reason has excelled Bacon? These four, yet this is the country of Chaucer, Spenser, Hooker, Taylor, Dryden, and Locke, and the race is not yet extinct. Witness Scott, Byron, Coleridge, Wordsworth. These heroes of peace have been flanked by the heroes of action, by the Drakes, Blakes, Cavendishes, Cookes, Marlboroughs, Nelsons, Wellingtons. And, one would say, the island has so long been the abode of a civil and free race, that the very dust is the remains of good and brave men, and the air retains the virtue their souls have shed into it, and they who inhale it feel its quality. But I do not say these things to feed your pride and mine, but because we are to hear the appeal of the ancestors to the children. We must feel as the Romans who put the statues of their fathers in the atrium, that every time the man entered his door, he might pass through the line of his forefathers. Quote, "We must be free or die who speak the tongue that Shakespeare spake. The faith and manners hold which Milton held. In everything we are sprung from earth's first blood, have titles manifold." I must not omit the record the pleasure which a circumstance gave me at the St. George's Festival in Montreal. The English there complimented each other by saying that they hoped it would be found that whenever they met an Englishman, they found one who would speak the truth, and we cannot think this festival fruitless if all over the world on April 23rd, the birth and death day of Shakespeare also, wherever 2 or 3 Englishmen are found, they meet to encourage each other in the nationality of speaking the truth. It is noticeable in Montreal that all the churches have a national attraction, as well as religious for their votaries. St. Andrew's is the Scottish Kirk, St. Patrick's is the Irish Catholic, St. David's the Welsh, St. George's the English, the Bostonians go to the Unitarian. I found on the 22nd of April 10 feet of old snow on each side of the carriage in riding out to Judge Day's 3 miles from Montreal. Mr. MacDonald made me laugh with his account of lectures in Montreal. He said if there were only 2 fellows left in Montreal, one would deliver a lecture and the other would hear it. Then there is another untranslated French passage. There is wonderful prodigality about the English genius in the 16th century. Their poets had marvelous stores to draw from, by simple force of mind equalizing themselves with the science of ours. There was a posset or drink called October, and they in like manner knew how to distill a whole September with harvests and astronomy into their verses. Mr. Downer at Dorchester said to me that they found that, among those who came out of the city and built or bought country seats, those who got snug homes remained, those who got bleak ones, fine view, etc., did not stay long, but sold out, a fact worth inserting in the economy lecture. Editor's note. Louis Kossuth, the Hungarian patriot and exile, then striving to interest the people of the United States in his country's behalf, visited Concord on May 11th and met with a cordial reception. He made an eloquent address in the town hall. Honorable John S. Keyes presided on this occasion, and Mr. Emerson made the address of welcome, which is printed in the miscellanies. End note. Wednesday, May 19th. I saw Miss Delia Bacon at Cambridge at the house of Mrs. Becker, and conversed with her on the subject of Shakespeare. Miss Bacon thinks that a key will yet be found to Shakespeare's interior sense, that some key to his secret may yet be discovered at Stratford, and I fancy think the famous epitaph, "Good friend, for Jesus' sake, forbear," protects some explanation of it. Her skepticism in regard to the authorship goes beyond the skepticism of Wolfe in regard to Homer, or Niebuhr to Latin history. The multitude of translations from the Latin and Greek classics that have been lately published have made great havoc with the old study of those languages. At Cambridge, every student is provided with a Bones translation of his author, and much the same effect is produced as when lexicons were first introduced. The only remedy would be a rage for prosody, which would enforce attention to the words themselves of the Latin or Greek verse. I saw Judd in Augusta in February and asked him who his companions were. He said, "Sunsets." I told him I thought they needed men. He said, he was a priest and conversed with the sick and dying. I told him, yes, very well, if people were sick and died to any purpose, but as far as I had observed, they were quite as frivolous as the rest, and that a man peremptorily needed now and then a reasonable word or two. To what base uses we put this ineffable intellect! To reading all day murders and railroad accidents, to choosing patterns for waistcoats and scarfs. A man is a torpedo to a man. I see him with wonder. He looks open and radiant, a god in the world. He understands astronomy, love, and heroism. But I touch him and am frozen by him. Wonderful power to benumb possesses this brother. Beware of a pair of eyes. What a puzzle! He is a little enough and nobody. As he comes down the hill, the sun shining in his eyes, the east wind blowing, he is only sensible, like an ox, of petty inconveniences. But he takes a book or hears a fact or sentiment, he dilates. He knows nature and the unspoken, unpenetrated universe. In this exaltation all bars sink. He is open as the element. One man is suddenly tantamount to the race. These powers, so great yet so haphazard discovered, how easily he might have missed them. Well, now he has them, and the magnificent dreams begin. All history, nay, all fable, Alexander, Harun, Ereskine, Hari himself, could do no more than this unaided person will. We hear and believe. But from month to month, from year to year, he delays and does not. He has passed out of the exaltation, and his hands are not equal to his thought, nor are the hands of his mind equal to the eyes of his mind. This tremendous limitation, this fate, whereby that which seems so facile, and of course only gets done by here and there a special hero, to do one specialty of it, once in 500 years, another to do another specialty in another 500 years, and so it takes 2,000 years for the dream of 1 hour to be fulfilled. Observe that the whole history of the intellect is expansions and concentrations. But all this old song I have trolled 100 times already, in better ways, only last night Henry Thoreau insisted much on expansions, and it sounded new. But of the congelation I was to add one word, that by experience, having learned that this old inertia or quality of oak and granite inheres in us, and punishes, as it were, any fit of geniality, we learn with surprise that our fellow man, or one of our fellow men or fellow women, is a doctor or enchanter who snaps the staunch iron hoops that bind us, thaws the fatal frost, and sets all the particles dancing each around each. He must be inestimable to us, whom we can say that we cannot say to ourselves. June 1st. The belief of some of our friends in their duration suggests one of those musty householders who keeps every broomstick and old grate, put in a box every old tooth that falls out of their heads, preserve the ancient frippery of their juvenile wardrobe, and they think God saves all the old souls which he has used up. What does he save them for? Smith, in the divine drama, rightly sees the unconventionality of the supreme actor, and I find in my platoon contrasted figures, as my brothers and Everett and Caroline and Margaret and Elizabeth and Jones Very and Sam Ward and Henry Thoreau and Alcott and Channing. Needs all these and many more to represent my relations. Besides, what we ask daily is to be conventional. Sadi and Aesop and Cervantes and Ben Jonson had, I doubt not, the tinker element and tinker experience which Miss Bacon wishes to ward off from Shakespeare, but which he must also have, as well as the courtly, which he wishes to claim for him, yet as great poet must be of the middle classes. See what is said in Eckermann, Volume 1, page 210. Napoleon was intellectual, valued things as they were, and not after fear or favor. How few men wish to know how the thing really stands, what is the law of it, without reference to any persons. Henry Thoreau's idea of the men he meets is that they are his old thoughts walking. It is all affectation to make much of them, as if he did not long since know them thoroughly. Then there is a couple quotations here that do have translations in English. The first one is from Ovid. Old things may give others joy, but happy am I that I was not born till now. And the second one states, Believe not that the Muses will aid in all things. And I'm not sure if it's attributed to Ovid as well, but underneath there is no author given. June 7th. We had a good walk, Channing and I, along the bank of the North Branch to the swamp and to the Harrington estate. Channing's young dog scampered and dived and swam at such a prodigal rate that one could not help grudging the youth of the universe, the animals their heaven. They must think us poor pedants in petticoats, as poet Cowper is painted in the Westall editions. How much more the dog knows of nature than his master, though his master were an Indian. The dog tastes, snuffs, rubs, feels, tries everything, everywhere, through miles of bush, brush, grass, water, mud, lilies, mountain, and sky. At present, however, at night, I am haunted by the lines, quote, The stars are in the quiet sky, etc., which I first heard sung under the mimic stars of the Mammoth Cave in Kentucky. But there is a charm in the line for my ear and fancy, and I must inquire for the song. In our walk we came to Ellery's garden of lupins, a quarter of an acre covered over with a wild bed of lupins, which, when the sun shone, looked like saloons of beauty in Mousseline de Laines. Nature's best feat is enamoring the man of these children, like kissing the knife that is to cut his throat. They sucking, fretting, mortifying, ruining him, and upsetting him at last, because they want his chair, and he, dear old donkey, well pleased to the end. There is such an obvious accumulation of dexterity in the use of tools in the old scholar and thinker that it is not to be believed nature will be such a spendthrift as to sponge all this out, like figures from a slate. Ellery replies that there is a great deal of self-importance, and that the good Oriental who cuts such a figure was bit by this fly. Yes, but the key to the world is to transfer all those conceits to the gases of chemistry, and though they have no value from the point of view of the individual, they have value as brute fact. Men achieve a certain greatness to their own surprise, whilst they were striving to achieve quite another conventional one. Metonymy. Poetry seems to begin in the slightest change of name, or detecting identity under variety of surface. Boys please themselves with crying to the coachman, "Put on the string," instead of lash, with calling a fire engine a tub and the engine-men tigers. A boy's game of ball is called four old cats. Poetry calls a snake a worm, and a shipwreck the sea novel finds cordilleras of water. I can never lose the ludicrous effect of using the word tin for money. June 13th. Yesterday, a walk with Ellery to the Lincoln Mill Brook, to 9 Acre Corner, and Conantum. It was the first right day of summer. Air, cloud, river, meadow, upland, mountain, all were in their best. We took a swim at the outlet of the little brook at Baker Farm. Ellery is grown an accomplished professor of the art of walking, and leads like an Indian. He likes the comic surprise of his botanic information, which is so suddenly enlarged. Since he knew Thoreau, he carries a little pocket-book, in which he affects to write down the name of each new plant, or the first day on which he finds the flower. He admires viburnum and cornel, and despises dooryards with foreign shrubs. Mr. Lee's farm at 9 Acre Corner he thinks the best situated house in Concord. Southern exposure, land rising behind close to the river, which lies in front, crossed by the bridge, and with wide outlook to the south and southwest. The view of the river from the top of the hill, Mine Hill, we found lovely, and had much to think of Mr. Gilpin all the afternoon. The river just filled its banks to the brim, a rare sight. Another fine picture from the top of Cunatam, where a view of Concord village has newly been opened by cutting away the wood last winter. The red sorrel gives the rich hue to the pastures. At Cunatam we visited the quote-unquote arboretum, where we found sassafras, bass, cornel, viburnum, ash, oak, slippery elm in close vicinity. Ellery has much to say of the abundance and perfection of lemon yellow in nature, which he finds in potentilla, ranunculus, cistus, yellow star of Bethlehem, etc., and which chemistry cannot well produce. M. Bouvriers, I believe it is, spent his life in producing a good yellow pigment. Miss B., a mantua maker in Concord, became a medium, and gave up her old trade for this new one, and is to charge a pistareen, a spasm, and $9 for a fit. This is the rat revelation, the gospel that comes by taps in the wall and thumps in the table drawer. The spirits make themselves of no reputation. They are rats and mice of society, and one of the demure disciples of the rat-tattoo the other day remarked that this, like every other communication from the spiritual world, began very low. What is the reason of the extremely bad character of New Hampshire politics? We haven't any honesty, said Jeremiah Mason, speaking of his compatriots of New Hampshire to Samuel Hoare. Mr. Hoare thinks that the whole school of New Hampshire public men, such as Levi Woodbury, differ toto coelho from such men as Judge Parsons and his class in Massachusetts. He that commits a crime defeats the object of his existence. Trifles, manners. 'Tis a narrow line that divides an awkward act from the finish of gracefulness. Every man eats well alone. Let a stranger come in, and he misses his mouth, spills his butter boat, and fails of finding the joint in carving, and that by so little. Gold teaspoons constrain us if we are used to silver. July 6th. The head of Washington hangs in my dining room for the past few days, and I cannot keep my eyes off of it. It has a certain Appalachian strength, as if it were truly the first fruits of America, and expressed the country. The heavy, leaden eyes turn on you as the eyes of an ox in a pasture, and the mouth has a gravity and a depth of quiet, as if this man had absorbed all the serenity of America and left none for his restless, rickety, hysterical countrymen. Noble, aristocratic head, with all kinds of elevation in it, that come out by turns. Such majestical ironies as he hears the day's politics at table. We imagine him hearing the letter of General Cass, the letter of General Scott, the letter of Mr. Pierce, the effronteries of Mr. Webster recited. This man listens like a god to these low conspirators. Henry Thoreau rightly said the other evening, talking of lightning rods, that the only rod of safety was in the vertebrae of his own spine. Euripides, Aeschylus are again the well-known pair of beauty and strength, which we had in Raphael and Angelo, in Shakespeare and Milton. What Aeschylus will translate our heaven-tempting politics into a warning ode, strophe and antistrophe. A slave, son of a member of Congress, flees from the plantation whip to Boston, is snatched by the marshal, is rescued by the citizens, an excited population. A strong chain is stretched round the courthouse. Webster telegraphs from Washington urgent orders to prosecute rigorously. Whig orators and interest intervene. Whig wisdom of waiting to be last devoured. Slave is caught, tried, marched at midnight under guard of marshals and pike and sword-bearing police to Long Wharf and embarked for Baltimore. Thank God, Choate. Thanks God 5 times in one speech. Boston thanks God. President election comes on. Webster triumphant. Boston sends 1,000 rich men to Baltimore. Convention meets. Webster cannot get one vote from Baltimore to the Gulf. Not one. The competitor is chosen. The Washington wine sours. Dinner's disturbed. The mob at Washington turns out at night to exult in Scott's election, goes to Webster's house and raises an outcry for Webster to come out and address them. He resists. The mob is violent, will not be refused. He is obliged to come in his nightshirt and speak from his window to the riffraff of Washington in honor of the election of Scott. Pleasant conversation of the Boston delegation on their return home. The cars unusually swift. Webster, earlier in Bodine Square, exhorts the citizens to conquer their prejudices, to put down agitation. It is treason to feed or defend this young mulatto, son of his friend, the member of Congress, and who has escaped to Boston from his pursuers. I think the piece should open by a eulogy of Webster by an ardent youth, first scholar at Cambridge, reciting the sentences he chiefly admires from his speeches at Plymouth, at New Hampshire Festival, at Congress and Faneuil Hall. Not sure about those English. We concede great power and culture to them, but it is in groups and classes. What extraordinary individuals saw you, sir? Those whom you see here are surely very trifling persons, with foolish-sounding voices. Who was this mighty man, unrivable by Americans, whom you saw? Was it Milnes? No. Macaulay? No. Disraeli? No. Wilson? No. Wordsworth, Carlyle, Tennyson? But they are as exceptional and admired there as here, and Carlyle acknowledged, or rather affirmed loudly, the mediocrity of his circle, and I was struck with poverty and limitation of their men. A man avails much to us, like a point of departure to the seaman, or his stake and stones to the surveyor. I am my own man more than most men, yet the loss of a few persons would be most impoverishing. A few persons who give flesh to what were else mere thoughts, and which now I am not at liberty to slight or in any manner treat as fictions. It were too much to say that the Platonic world I might have learned to treat as cloudland, had I not known Alcott, who is a native of that country, yet I will say that he makes it as solid as Massachusetts to me, and Thoreau gives me in flesh and blood and pertinacious Saxon belief my own ethics. He is far more real, and daily practically obeying them, than I, and fortifies my memory at all times with an affirmative experience which refuses to be set aside. I live a good while and acquire as much skill in literature as an old carpenter does in wood. It occurs then what pity, that now, when you know something, have at least learned so much good omission, your organs should fail you, your eyes, health, fire, and zeal of work should decay daily. Then I remember that it is the mind of the world which is the good carpenter, the good scholar, sailor, or blacksmith, thousand-handed, versatile, all applicable in all these indifferent channels, entering with wild vigor, excited by novelty in that untried channel confined by dikes of pedantry. It is this which works out the proper results of that to the end, and surprises all with perfect consent, alter et idem, to every other excellence. Lexicography or Aristotelian logic being found consentaneous with music, with astronomy, with roses, with love. In you this rich soil has peeped, despite your horny, muddy eyes, at books and poetry. Well, it took you up and showed you something to the purpose, that there was something there. Look, look, old mole, there straight up before you is the magnificent sun. If only for the instant you see it. Well, in this way it educates the youth of the universe. In this way warms, suns, refines every particle. Then it drops the little channel or canal through which the life rolled beatific like a fossil to the ground, thus touched and educated by a moment of sunshine to be the fairer material for the future channels and canals through which the old glory shall dart again, in new directions until the universe shall have been shot through and through, tilled with light. Self-disparagement is a human trick, but there remain unbroken by our defects the old laws, upspringing like the arch of the sky, or like sunlight which all the wind in the universe cannot blow away. High, old laws, round, unremovable, self-executing. It is noble, it is poetic, and makes poets only to have seen them, to have computed their curve. Dwarves may see the rainbow as well as giants. Tour de force. I have been told by women that whatever work they perform by dint of resolution and without spontaneous flow of spirits, they invariably expiate by a fit of sickness, brute force of duty. Everybody knows people who appear bedridden. Lovejoy the preacher came to Concord and hoped Henry Thoreau would go to hear him. I have got a sermon on purpose for him. No, the aunt said, we are afraid not. Then he wished to be introduced to him at the house, so he was confronted. Then he put his hand from behind on Henry, tapping his back, and said, Here's the chap who camped in the woods. Henry looked round and said, And here's the chap who camps in a pulpit. Lovejoy looked disconcerted and said no more. Margaret Swan. Footnote. A clairvoyant of Medford said these things to Miss Osgood. Quote, The thoughts that rushed upon me were unutterable. They seemed like the sound, I say sound, of a cataract of light. Ask me not what they were. I should perish in trying to give language to them, said this new Pythoness. Quote, Thoughts that fill my mind are like consuming flames, and I am obliged to interpose a strong human will between myself and them, to sheath my mind, as it were, against them, and admit them slowly, little by little. Words, she added, are the embroidered curtain which then veils for me the holy of holies, after the burning thoughts not to be uttered. Again an awestruck look. My mind seems a shower of words in all languages. They sail through it like little boats of light. The two Newmans in England are distinguished, one as Papist and one extreme Liberalist. The two junior Quinceys in Boston are, one Hunker and the other Abolitionist. These cases remind me of two brothers, one of whom, being a gardener and suffering every year from the bugs, the other resolved to be entomologist, so that the worse the case was for the garden, the better might his museum thrive. July 18th. Henry Thoreau makes himself characteristically the admirer of the common weeds which have been hoed at by a million farmers all spring and summer, and yet have prevailed, and just now come out triumphant over all lands, lanes, pastures, fields, and gardens, such is their pluck and vigor. We have insulted them with low names, too, pigweed, smartweed, red root, lousewort, chickweed. He says that they have fine names, amaranth, ambrosia. Mr. Winthrop is a strong example of the insufficiency of any and all outward advantages to resist public opinion in this country. He has good birth, rare as a gem with us, and his face still presents a striking resemblance to the pictures of his ancestor, the first governor of Massachusetts, and the Historical Society's chambers. His name has been well marked by public esteem, by some scientific and other reputation, by wealth and fashion, ever since the Pilgrim era. He has himself had the best education and the best introduction to public life. Of blameless morals, elegant tastes, popular manners, he came early into distinction, the popular representative of Boston in Congress. He has enjoyed the rare honor for a Northern man of being elected Speaker of the House. He has added the complimentary distinction of being himself the head of one section of the Whig party in this state, not merely the permanent inferiority of Mr. Choate's position. One would say, if ability and position availed, Mr. Winthrop, of all men, would be justified in a manly independence. But such sayings betray a beautiful ignorance of the habits and exigencies of our happy land. The handsome oration pronounced to the alumni of the college on Thursday will dissipate to the discerning this romancing. Mr. Winthrop introduced his discourse with much ease and beauty, and the audience had a moment's leave to indulge the hope that statesmen and senators were as glad as others to throw off the harness and treat themselves to a pure dipping or two in the Castalian pools. But if audiences forget themselves, statesmen do not. We were presently offered the old, well-known paragraph about religion in which Mr. Webster, Mr. Choate, and other eminent moralists have so successfully employed their histrionic eloquence. Boston immediately took out its handkerchief to the accustomed tenderness. The power of the written and spoken letter and the immense advantage the orator enjoys in the reporting and publication over empires were well stated. Then the power of private as the source of public opinion was seriously indicated. Here, it may be said, Mr. Winthrop not said, but allowed to transpire, the only serious thing in his oration to this effect. I am, as you see, a man virtuously inclined, and only corrupted by my profession of politics. Having made this manifesto, Mr. Winthrop proceeded with his work much in the tone and spirit with which Lord Bacon prosecuted his benefactor, the Earl of Essex. The whole of the discourse was therefore a profusion of bows to Boston, to the supposed Boston, though now and then a slight mistake we noticed in the guess of the orator as to what the true Boston believed. Of course, not one clear statement of opinion, but every statement qualified with a considered recommendation to mercy, death with recommendation to mercy. Kossuth was praised because he was eloquent, and blamed because he was eloquent, and blamed because he meant sincerely. The newspapers were roasted for their sectionalism and slander, and applauded for their patriotism and power. Mr. Clay was safely praised. All literary men, if we were rightly understood, were soundly whipped as very naughty. Mr. Webster properly praised, and Mr. Everett. Quote, "The purified soul will fear nothing," said Plotinus. Sadi says, the trees were in blossom when he began his Gulistan. Before the fruit was ripe on them, he had ended. Whiggery has found for itself a new formula in Boston, this namely that when we go to drive, the breeching is as indispensable as the traces. Its claim is that it blocks the wheels, that the Democratic Party goes with a rush for Cuban invasion, Mexico, Canada, and all, that the Whig Party resists these, assuming, however, that the total population is bad and means badly. But all this despair comes of incapacity, their eyes being only on money. They do not conceive hope or faith. They are the shop-till party. Souls with a certain quantity of light are in excess and irrevocably belong to the moral class. What animal force they may retain to the contrary notwithstanding. Souls with less light, it is chemically impossible that they be moral. What talent or good they have to the contrary notwithstanding, and these belong to the world of fate, or animal good, the youth of the universe, not yet 21, not yet voter, not yet robed in the toga virilis. Nor is it permitted to any soul of the free or of the apprentice class, that is, to the free or to the fated, to cast a vote for the other. The world wants so much alum, and so much saccharin, so much iron, and so much hemp, so much paper, and so much mahogany. Nor could any rebellion or arbitrariment be suffered in its atoms without chaos, if a particle of lead were to prefer to mask its properties and exert the energies of cork or of vitriol. If coal should undertake to be a lemon, or feathers turpentine, we should have a pretty ruin to be sure. But the laws use azote, oxygen, carbon, lime, magnesia, and so forth as their means, and these very excesses and defects in you, these determinations to the moral or the animal, are the very means by which high nature works, and cannot afford to want. Be her footmen, her fates, her couriers, muses, and angels. Statesmen are the superficiality of surface. For if slavery is a good, then is lying, theft, arson, incest, homicide, each and all goods, and to be maintained by union societies. Why did all manly gifts in Webster fail? He wrote on nature's grandest brow, for sale. This is the end of part 1 of Emerson's journal collection number 43, dating from the year 1852, when the author was 49 years old. In the next video, we will conclude journal collection number 43. Thank you for listening.